The house felt wrong the moment they returned from the funeral, as if the walls themselves understood that Sarah would never walk through the door again, and Emily stood at the top of the stairs watching her father move slowly across the living room like a man who had forgotten where he was going, his black suit still on, his tie loose, his eyes empty in a way she had never seen before. Neighbors from their quiet Portland street had filled the kitchen with food and soft hugs just hours earlier. But now the trays of untouched casseroles sat under dim lights while the evening sky turned gray outside, and Daniel lowered himself into a chair at the dining table with a heaviness that made Emily's chest ache because this was the same table where her mother used to laugh loudly, tapping her coffee mug against his every Sunday morning, and the silence that followed felt louder than any argument ever could. Emily was 23, old enough to understand hospital machines and whispered doctor conversations, old enough to sign papers and make phone calls, yet in that moment she felt like a little girl again, wishing her mom would step out of the hallway and tell them both that everything was fine, but deep down she knew it wasn't, because she had held her mother's hand during those final days, had heard her soft breathing grow weaker, had memorized the way her father refused to leave the hospital room even for sleep, and now that strength seemed to have drained from him completely. Daniel stared at nothing, his hands flat on the table, his wedding ring catching the kitchen light, and Emily noticed how still he was, how the steady man who once fixed broken fences and solved every problem now looked unsure of the next minute, and she realized grief had not only taken her mother but had stolen the center of her father's world. She walked downstairs quietly, each step careful, as if loud sounds might shatter what little calm remained, and when she reached the kitchen she saw a photo album open beside him, pages filled with years of family trips, Seattle rain, Chicago snow, sunny afternoons on Cannon Beach, and her breath caught when she saw the picture of her parents holding hands, smiling at something only they understood, because that smile was gone now, replaced by the hollow look in Daniel's eyes. He did not notice her at first, and she watched him trace her mother's face in the photo with his finger. A small movement that carried so much pain that Emily felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she blinked them back because if he looked up and saw her break, he might break even more. Finally she pulled out a chair and sat across from him, the wood scraping softly against the floor, and he looked up slowly as if returning from a faraway place, his voice low and rough when he said, "I don't know what to do now," and the words surprised her because her father had always known what to do. Whether it was choosing a college for her, changing careers to support Sarah's dreams, or guiding friends through hard times, yet now he sounded lost, and in that moment Emily understood that grief was not just sadness but confusion, like standing in a familiar room after someone had moved all the furniture. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, feeling how cold his skin was despite the warm air inside, and she spoke carefully, choosing each word as if it mattered more than anything else, telling him they would figure things out together, that the house did not have to feel empty forever, that he was not alone even if it felt that way, and though she did not yet say the deeper thought forming in her heart, she felt it growing stronger with each second she watched him struggle. Daniel closed the album gently and leaned back in his chair, staring toward the hallway that led to the bedroom he once shared with Sarah. And Emily could almost see the memories passing through his mind, the late-night talks, the quiet jokes, the comfort of having someone who understood him without explanation, and she realized that losing her mother had also forced her father into a world he never wanted to face, a world without the partner who balanced him, challenged him, and loved him for decades. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time that felt both too fast and too slow. And Emily knew that this was the first real night of their new reality, the first night without hospital hope or funeral arrangements to distract them, just raw silence and truth. And she made a quiet decision then that she would not let her father disappear into that silence, that she would find a way to help him stand again even if it meant being braver than she felt, because she loved him not only as a father but as a man who had given his whole heart to her mother. And she understood that such deep love could not simply vanish but had to go somewhere. As the evening darkened and streetlights flickered on outside, Emily stayed at the table with him, not speaking much, just being there, and though the grief still hung heavy in the air, something small shifted between them, an unspoken promise that they would face this loss side by side, and even in the middle of sorrow, that promise carried the faintest hint of hope, the kind that begins quietly, almost like a whisper, before anyone fully realizes how powerful it might become. Rain fell steadily against the kitchen windows the next evening, thin silver lines sliding down the glass as Emily stood in the hallway watching her father sit at the table again, this time surrounded by papers he barely understood because Sarah had always handled the insurance forms, the bank calls, the quiet adult tasks that kept life smooth, and Daniel looked defeated as he stared at numbers without really seeing them, his reading glasses low on his nose, his jaw tight with silent frustration. The room smelled like untouched coffee, and the overhead light cast a pale glow that made everything feel colder than it was. And Emily realized this was not just about bills but about the fear of facing a future alone, so she stepped forward, placed her hand gently on his shoulder, and said his name softly, the way her mother used to when she wanted his full attention, and he looked up slowly, eyes tired but alert enough to notice something serious in her expression. She took a deep breath because what she was about to say felt heavy and sacred. And in a voice barely louder than the rain she told him that Mom had spoken to her during those final quiet hours at the hospital. That there had been a moment when the machines hummed low and the world outside the window felt far away, and Sarah had squeezed her hand and whispered a worry that had nothing to do with pain or fear but with him, and Daniel straightened in his chair as if bracing for impact, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. Emily continued carefully, explaining that her mother had said she was not afraid of leaving this world but was afraid of leaving Daniel alone in it, that she knew his heart was deep and loyal and that he would lock it away out of guilt, and she didn't want that for him. She wanted him to live fully even if she could not stand beside him anymore, and the words hung between them like fragile glass, and for a moment Daniel could not speak. He stood abruptly and walked toward the window, watching the rain blur the streetlights outside, his shoulders stiff, his voice unsteady when he finally said he could never replace Sarah, that loving again would feel like betrayal, and Emily moved closer, her own heart pounding but her voice steady as she told him that love was not a chair someone else could simply sit in, that it was not a competition or a replacement, that what he had with Mom was theirs forever and nothing could change that, but shutting down his heart would not honor her memory. It would only shrink the very part of him she loved most. He turned toward her then, confusion mixing with pain in his eyes, and asked if she truly believed Sarah meant those words, if she truly thought her mother would want him to open himself again one day, and Emily nodded without hesitation because she remembered the softness in her mother's voice, the calm certainty in her expression, and she told him that Mom knew his strength but also his weakness, that he gave everything to the people he loved and would struggle to build a life alone, and she wanted him to have companionship, laughter, shared mornings, someone to talk to when the house felt too quiet. The rain grew heavier, tapping harder against the roof as if echoing the storm inside him, and Daniel ran a hand through his graying hair, his breathing uneven, his mind torn between loyalty to the past and fear of the future. And Emily stepped closer and lowered her voice to a whisper that felt almost sacred, telling him he was still alive, that his story was not finished, that loving again would not erase Mom but would show that the love she built in this family was strong enough to continue growing even after loss. Something shifted in his face then, not a full smile but a crack in the wall he had built around his heart, and he sank back into the chair, staring at the papers again but no longer seeing just numbers, seeing instead the long years ahead and the possibility that they did not have to be empty. Emily felt tears threaten but held them back because this moment required strength, and she told him she would always support him, that she wanted him happy even if happiness looked different than before. And Daniel finally reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly as if grounding himself in the present. And he admitted that part of him feared judgment, feared what others might think if he ever moved forward, feared disappointing his daughter most of all, and Emily shook her head gently, assuring him that her love for him did not depend on him staying frozen in grief, that she wanted him to heal not only as her father but as a man who deserved connection and warmth. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as the rain began to soften, and for the first time since the funeral, the air in the room felt less suffocating, as if a window had opened somewhere unseen, and though Daniel did not promise anything that night, did not declare he was ready to love again, he allowed the idea to exist without pushing it away, and that was enough, because the whisper Emily shared was not about rushing the future but about freeing him from guilt, about giving him permission to imagine sunlight beyond the storm. And as they sat there in the quiet after the rain slowed, both of them understood that something important had changed, not loudly or dramatically, but gently, like the first small crack of dawn after a long and restless night. Weeks passed, and the heavy silence that once filled the house began to thin like morning fog lifting from the streets of Portland, and Emily noticed the change in small but clear ways, her father no longer sitting in the dark after dinner but turning on lamps, opening windows, letting fresh air move through rooms that had felt frozen in time. Daniel still carried grief. It showed in his quiet moments and in the way he sometimes paused when he saw Sarah's photo on the hallway wall, but he was no longer trapped inside it, and that shift began the morning Emily walked into the kitchen and saw him dressed in a crisp blue button-down instead of his usual worn sweater, carefully shaving, checking his reflection twice as if he had somewhere important to be, and when she raised an eyebrow with a soft smile, he hesitated only a second before saying he was meeting an old friend for coffee downtown. Just coffee, nothing serious, yet the slight nervous tone in his voice revealed it meant more than he admitted. Her heart felt light at the sight of him trying again, not because she wanted to replace her mother's memory, but because she wanted to see life return to his eyes, and as he grabbed his car keys she noticed his shoulders were straighter, his step steadier, and she realized healing does not arrive in grand gestures but in simple actions like choosing to leave the house. The friend's name was Linda, someone he had known years ago in Seattle before moving for Sarah's career, and she too had faced loss, losing her husband to illness, so when they first reconnected through a short message of sympathy it felt safe, respectful, rooted in shared understanding rather than excitement. And that afternoon Daniel sat across from Linda in a quiet cafe near the river, hands wrapped around a warm mug, unsure how to speak about his late wife without breaking down. Yet Linda listened patiently, her eyes kind, her words thoughtful, and for the first time in months he spoke about Sarah without collapsing under the weight of it. He described her laugh, her love of the ocean, the way she made their house feel alive, and instead of discomfort, Linda responded with respect, acknowledging that grief and new beginnings can exist side by side. When Daniel returned home that evening, Emily sat on the porch swing pretending to scroll on her phone but secretly waiting for signs of how it went, and she saw it immediately. In the small upward curve of his mouth, in the way he sat beside her instead of retreating indoors, and he told her simply that they had talked for hours, that it felt easy and calm, and though guilt had tried to creep in, it did not overpower him this time because he remembered Emily's whisper and the permission it carried. Days turned into more coffee meetings, then walks in the park, then quiet dinners where conversation flowed naturally, and Daniel wrestled with doubt more than once, questioning if he was moving too fast or dishonoring Sarah's memory, but each time he reflected, he realized his love for his late wife had not shrunk, it remained strong and steady, while something new was gently forming beside it, not replacing but expanding his capacity to care. Emily observed everything carefully, proud yet protective, ensuring her father felt supported rather than judged. And one evening when he admitted fear that she might resent him, she reassured him that her happiness was tied to his healing, that she wanted him to have companionship instead of loneliness, and her calm acceptance eased the last of his hesitation. The house slowly transformed as Linda visited, bringing fresh flowers and warm laughter that blended respectfully with the memories already living there, never attempting to remove Sarah's presence but honoring it, and Daniel felt relief in that balance, knowing he did not have to choose between past and present. There were still moments of sadness. Like when he heard a song Sarah loved or found an old note tucked inside a book, yet those moments no longer froze him in place. Instead they reminded him of how deeply he had loved and how fortunate he was to have known such connection, and that realization gave him courage to step forward. One quiet evening, as autumn leaves gathered along the porch steps, Daniel told Emily he had invited Linda to join them for dinner the following weekend, and though his voice carried nervous energy, it also held hope, and Emily smiled, sensing that this was not just about romance but about rebuilding a life that loss had tried to dismantle. That night, as Daniel stood by the living room window watching the city lights flicker in the distance, he felt something unfamiliar yet comforting, a blend of memory and possibility existing in the same breath, and he understood that moving forward did not mean leaving Sarah behind. It meant carrying her love into every new chapter, and as the house filled once again with conversation and gentle laughter, both father and daughter realized that grief had not defeated them, it had reshaped them, and through patience, honesty, and a willingness to open the door just slightly, light had begun to return to their home in a way neither of them expected but both quietly needed. Autumn settled gently over Portland, painting the trees golden red, and just when life inside the house began to feel steady again, doubt returned quietly to Daniel's heart one late afternoon as he sat alone in the living room holding his phone, staring at an old voicemail from Sarah he had not listened to in months, his thumb hovering before pressing play, and when her familiar voice filled the room, warm, playful, alive, it hit him harder than he expected, the sound pulling him back to hospital corridors and whispered promises, and suddenly the progress he had made felt fragile, almost wrong, as if allowing himself to care for Linda meant he was slowly letting Sarah fade, and the thought tightened his chest with guilt. He leaned back on the couch, eyes closed, letting the message end in silence, and memories rushed in fast, road trips along the Oregon coast, quiet mornings reading newspapers together, the steady comfort of knowing someone understood him without explanation, and for a moment he wondered if opening his heart again had been a mistake, if grief was something he was supposed to carry alone as proof of loyalty. The front door opened softly and Emily stepped inside, noticing immediately the stillness in the room and the way her father's posture had changed, shoulders tense, gaze distant, and she sensed the storm beneath his calm expression. She walked over and sat beside him without asking questions, waiting, and after a long pause he admitted in a low voice that he felt confused, that hearing Sarah again made everything feel fresh and raw, that part of him feared he was betraying the life they built together by moving forward, and Emily listened carefully before speaking, choosing her words with care because she understood this was not about romance but about identity, about a man trying to understand who he was without the woman who had stood beside him for decades. She reminded him gently that love does not vanish when someone new enters your life, that the years with her mother were unchangeable, permanent, woven into every habit and value he carried, and that loving Linda did not erase those memories but proved that the love Sarah taught him was still alive within him. Daniel looked at her, eyes heavy with emotion, and confessed he was afraid of forgetting small details, her laugh, her favorite songs, the exact way she said his name, and Emily reached for his hand, assuring him that memory does not disappear simply because happiness returns, that joy and sorrow can live side by side without canceling each other out. She told him something simple yet powerful, that shrinking his heart out of fear would not honor Sarah, because the woman he loved had always encouraged him to live fully, to embrace life with courage, and choosing companionship again was not disloyalty but strength. Her steady voice grounded him, and as he sat there absorbing her words, he realized his grief had shifted from sharp pain to deep longing, and longing did not have to control his future. That evening he stepped outside onto the porch, cool air brushing against his face, and called Linda, not with grand declarations but with honesty, explaining that he still carried grief and always would, that his late wife's memory would remain part of him, and Linda responded with understanding rather than insecurity, telling him she respected the love he had experienced and did not wish to replace it, only to build something new with patience. That conversation eased something inside him, and over the following weeks he allowed himself to move forward slowly, introducing Linda more naturally into their lives, inviting her for dinners where stories were shared openly, where Sarah's name could still be spoken without discomfort, and Emily watched as balance formed, not perfect but real. There were evenings when Daniel would pause by Sarah's framed photo in the hallway, whispering quiet words of gratitude before joining Linda in the kitchen, and instead of guilt he began to feel peace, understanding that his capacity to love had expanded rather than divided. Winter approached, bringing crisp mornings and early sunsets, and one night as snow threatened in the forecast, Daniel and Emily stood side by side on the porch once more, looking up at a clear sky filled with stars, and he told her softly that her whisper weeks ago had saved him from disappearing into grief, that her courage had given him permission to imagine a future without feeling shame. Emily smiled, reminding him she had only spoken the truth her mother believed, that love was never meant to trap someone in darkness, and Daniel felt gratitude not just for Linda's companionship but for his daughter's strength, realizing that even in loss their family bond had deepened. Inside the house laughter echoed lightly as Linda prepared tea, the sound blending with old memories rather than replacing them, and Daniel understood finally that love is not a limited space where one person must leave for another to enter. It is a growing field that makes room for new seasons while honoring the ones that came before. As the first snowflakes began to fall, quiet and soft, he felt steady, carrying Sarah in his heart and hope in his hands, and he knew that the whisper spoken on a rainy night had changed everything, not by erasing grief but by teaching him that moving forward was not forgetting, it was living, and living fully was the greatest tribute he could ever give to the love that shaped him.